Sophie Dispatch.
Hello. This is Nick Kaufman.
Uh-huh.
There's a guy trapped in a grain bin.
Back in actually the fall of 1977, I was asked to participate in a training program for firefighters who had just been at the scene of an entrapment in a grain bin, and they were unable to retrieve the person successfully, and they weren't sure what they were doing right and what they were doing wrong. And so we did a training, and then I began keeping records of incidents that occurred in grain storage. And I've been doing that now for almost 39 years, and during that time we've gathered data on about 1,200 cases in which a person was trapped in a grain bin, engulfed in a grain bin, or a grain wagon, or some other kind of facility, and about 60% of those people have died.
In this recreation of an actual grain bin entrapment on a southern Indiana farm, watch closely. Can you identify what went wrong and right in this incident? Apply what you learn here on your farm, and then
I'm Jim Draghi, and I farm in Posey County in partnership with my brother, Paul. The morning of the 28th of March was just an ordinary day here at the farm. Everybody, while we don't live right on the site, both Paul and I were here, and we had grain trucks loaded, and we headed, we're delivering grain down to the ethanol plant that day, and when we could no longer make another trip to the ethanol plant is when we decided we would unload this bin that didn't have very much in it, can probably get it on a, maybe not quite, but maybe a couple semi-loads, and then we would be ready again for the next morning. So we started unloading the bin and had about 150 bushels come out of it or something like that, and it quit flowing. Went up the stairs, looked at the inside and decided, well, maybe there's a lump down there. So I got a rod, went in, poked around, found the center well, and started to remove any obstruction if there was one there. Thought we had it, thought it was doing good, so I told my brother, go ahead and start it up. In just a matter of seconds, I was down up to my shirt pocket in the corn. And as I was going down, I was throwing corn against the bin wall and hollering at him to shut it off.
It was difficult to hear the corn hitting the sidewall because there was, the auger was running, the leg was running, the corn was running into the truck at least part of the time. And I wasn't sure what I was hearing first. I walked over closer to the bin, then I could hear my brother hollering at it just to shut it off. When I looked in the bin and see my brother stuck in the grain about to his chest, I really didn't think it'd be a problem to shovel him out because there was room to throw the grain. And I figured, well, it won't take too long, I'll dig him down and he'll be able to pull himself out.
In the process there of digging out, he's shoveling grain out against the bin wall. Neighbor, Nick Kaufman, stopped in and was delivering seed corn. Couldn't see anyone, and consequently he was hearing corn hit the bin wall. He climbed up the stairs and also crawled in the bin, and he and Paul alternated trying to dig me loose.
We moved a lot of grain, and we weren't gaining much. And it's surprising how little grain it takes to hold you in a bin. We got it down about his waist, but that wasn't near enough for him to move himself out.
So we've got to think about, okay, how can we get out of here? Thought about the situation and thought, well, we're not that far from the floor. If we start it up again, I'll continue to sink. My feet won't get in the auger, I'm off to the side. As soon as my feet are on the floor, the grain will keep flowing around me and I'll be free. So Paul was down at the controls, Nick was up at the manhole in the eave, and we started it up. Well, apparently there was more depth in there than we thought there was. So again, I was down to approximately my shirt pocket in here, and now we had no place to go with grain.
When we decided that we weren't going to be able to shovel him out, we knew there were rescue tubes available in fire departments, so we made the decision that's the way we needed to go, because we weren't able to shovel enough corn out of the way.
Yes, I'd like to report a man trapped in a grain bin.
No, this story's not over. We'll return to the rescue effort shortly. But the entrapment of a farmer, farm worker, or family member in a grain bin is a story that plays out over and over again across the Corn Belt states with startling similarity. And the result? Nearly 70% of entrapment victims wind up becoming fatalities. Did you notice the most glaring factors in the entrapment you just witnessed? Nationally, the 384 entrapment victims over the last decade are willing to bet you missed something. So let's go back and see what critical factors you may have overlooked.
Well, in this particular case, the outcome was positive because there was another person there. And going back to what I said earlier, was that in most cases, the farmer's in there by themselves. There's no one to get their attention. There's no one that they can call to or involve in any way to protect them from being completely buried. So the first thing they did right was to have at least two people there present. Then the condition of the grain was that it was spoiled in some way. Somehow it got crusted. And so it further reinforces the point that if you maintain good grain quality, you manage the grain, you keep it dry, you keep it under 14%, you make sure that the roof isn't leaking and you're not getting excess moisture when storms come through into the grain, you're going to be able to empty that bin out without ever going in that bin other than to remove the residual on the floor. So that point of maintaining grain quality is really, really important. And then the next thing is that he went in the bin and someone was on the outside and there was no observer. So if the observer was actually on the top of the bin looking in and could see what was going on, he could much more quickly shut off this operation. If you look at it from a regulatory perspective, no one should ever be in that bin when they turn on the auger. They shouldn't be standing on the surface of the grain. Farmers still don't recognize, in my mind, how quickly one becomes engulfed in grain. For example, the human body is about 2 bushels. Some are larger, some are smaller, but we're using unloading equipment that can easily move about 2,000 bushels of grain an hour. So if you look at just the physicality of this, the shape of the body, the size of the body, the flow of grain, it only takes 10, 15 seconds to be drawn into the grain flow where you can't self-extricate. You can't pull yourself out, you can't swim yourself out, you're stuck. And if someone doesn't come along and shut off the flow of grain, you're going to be sucked into that grain, and within probably a minute or so, you're going to be under the surface of the grain and most likely not survive. A good understanding of how fast this grain flow works, especially as you move into the center of the bin, is very important for farmers to understand why they just can't go in there with a pole or a pipe or something and stand in there over top of the outlet, because once that grain begins to flow, they're going to go almost immediately to the point of where they're going to be entrapped and not be able to pull themselves out.
When I looked in the bin and see my brother stuck in the grain about to his chest, I really didn't think it'd be a problem to shovel him out because there was room to throw the grain. And I figured, well, it won't take too long, I'll dig him down and he'll be able to pull himself out.
One of the things that strikes me often is the delay on farms in calling 911. Everyone thinks they can dig themselves out. And the reality is that almost never is that possible. And in some cases, 2-3 hours goes by while the family or members, neighbors come over and they're trying to dig this guy out. Almost never is it possible for untrained rescue personnel to dig someone out of a grain. Even if they got scoop shovels and they got multiple people working at it, grain is like sand. Every shovelful out toward the ring or the outside of the pile or the bin, another 2 shovelfuls come back in on the person. You just cannot move grain fast enough away because of the angle of repose, how grain just continues to avalanche back in on the victim, and eventually you'll cover them up and they'll die.
Thought about the situation and thought, well, we're not that far from the floor. If we start it up again, I'll continue to sink. My feet won't get in the auger, I'm off to the side. As soon as my feet are on the floor, the grain will keep flowing around me and I'll be free.
It's a mistake to ever turn on the unload equipment when someone is trapped in that grain in the bin, regardless of where they are. It ought to be locked out. If you can't lock it out, there ought to be someone there to secure it so that nobody turns it on or tries to engage it anyway, and immediately call for assistance.
We had a combination of Mark Township Fire Department, which was us on the initial dispatch, and then we automatically contacted Black Township Fire and Rescue, as well as Posey County EMS, which is dispatched the same time that we are for the rescue.
I was kind of waiting on Jim to come home because I knew he had a meeting that night and that he would be home. He had thought earlier in the afternoon. And I remember thinking that, wondered kind of where he was because he wasn't home. And I thought, you know, if he doesn't come home and do some of the things he'd said, he wouldn't make it to the meeting on time. And that's very unlike Jim to do that. But then somebody always stops by the farm and they get in the conversation or what, things happen like that. So you don't really think, you don't think the negative ever. But a friend called and she said, I want you to know, she says, everything's all right. They're talking to him, everything's fine. And of course, the first thing to think about is what happened. She said, but Jim had gotten caught in the grain bin. I've forgotten the exact wording that she used, but she said the medical personnel are wanting some medical information. And of course, the first thing I did was grab my purse and my coat and head toward the door.
First thing he asks is, he said, are you breathing okay? I said, yeah, kind of, that. He says, well, I'm going to put a oxygen bottle on a back support, slide it down to you. You go ahead and put that on. In the meantime, we'll get some other supports in here and we'll bring the rescue tube in. We're going to need more to get the next thing he asked was, he said, can you feel your legs? Yes. He said, can you wiggle your toes in your boots? Yes. Okay.
All right, you're clear.
And the rescue guys began to assemble the rescue grain tube around me. The irony in that is about a year before, the Posey County Farm Bureau and the Posey County Co-op had partnered together to buy a grain rescue tube and provide some certified training for all the volunteer fire departments in the area. Little did I know that a year later I'd be the first one to use it.
So we started assembling the grain bin tube, which about a year before, I was fortunate enough to take a train-the-trainer course so that we could train the rest of our personnel in grain bins. So all of a sudden my training kicked in and knew what steps to take as if we had done it before. So it worked out really well.
Put that right in front of you there.
Had an auger with it that powered by a battery-powered drill. They removed the grain from the interior of the tube and I was able to come out of the tube.
Put these bars on the side. All right. Walk yourself up 1 foot at a time. Nice and easy. Step on it. Sit down, roll around. There you go.
I'm gonna send you the safety line down and the main line down, okay?
Okay.
They laid me down onto a backboard, strapped me into that, which was on top of an orange poly sheet, which they laced around me. Among the rescue vehicles that was here was the Black Township Fire Department's ladder truck, where they had it extended up to the manhole and a rope coming in through it. They tied me to that rope, and we went out the top of the manhole, kind of like a mummy.
How you doing down there? How's it going?
We're good, we're good.
Yeah, we ended up total on the day of the rescue was probably at least 15 people there. And then, like I said, I believe the Sheriff's Department from Posey County also showed up as well. You know, it's one thing to get in the grain bin to get the gentleman out, but all the equipment that you have to get up into the bin, the grain tube, getting all the backboards so that we can make it safe for our guys to be able to walk across the corn, making sure, you know, grain augers are locked out and tagged out so that, you know, nobody's going to come flip a switch when we've got rescuers in there.
When I got out, we're probably about 30 feet in the air headwise here. First thing I noticed was there was a large number of rescue vehicles and people outside. That was my first thought. Oh my goodness. And my second thought was, I hope you guys tied a really good knot on this on this rope. We were out. They swung the boom around, lowered me down to the ground. They unlaced me from everything, put me on the gurney, and we got pushed into the ambulance, and we were going to head into Deacon's Hospital for the emergency room to be checked out.
It was real interesting because the ambulance, they had him in the back, and I just kind of stuck my head in there. And you know, the ambulance worker that day, he was like, he told Jim, he said, you're one lucky guy, because a lot of times these don't end up with you in the ambulance.
So I would rank this as kind of a unique case in which he had somebody outside that would be able to shut it off. Now, as far as their response, if I was to rate their response, I would say I would much rather have seen them make that initial call to 911 rather than getting other people in there, trying to help dig them out. And the reality is that they should have gotten help there right away, as soon as possible. And if there had been an observer outside of the bin watching, it may have been even easier to have extricated him. But we're thankful in this case there was somebody else around. And then there also needs to be a plan for what happens if somebody is in that bin, becomes entrapped, what's going to happen? One of the things that strikes me often is the delay on farms in calling 911. The first thing of that plan when someone is entrapped should be to call 911, to get trained professionals there who are going to assess the situation, reduce the likelihood of another person becoming entrapped in the grain or becoming injured while they're up on the roof or whatever. And I think that's something that's often lacking on a lot of farms, is at least having a plan or thinking through the process of what am I going to do when something bad happens.
But farmers, everyone knows, are in a particularly dangerous profession. They have a lot of accidents that occur. The one thing that still strikes me is that when My daughter called that evening while I was at the hospital waiting on Jim to be released, and I told her where I was and what was going on, and she started screaming just at the top of her lungs, just screaming. I could hardly hear the words she was screaming. She was so upset. And she was like, doesn't he know that he's close to retirement? Doesn't he know he has a grandchild on the way? And I think that would be the thing that I would want most of these guys to stop and think about, if just for a minute.
This ended in a story that I'm able to tell. Not all grain entrapments end that way, unfortunately. And the trauma and the chaos that could have ensued had it not ended in such a manner would have been a bad situation for a whole lot of people.
If there's something that you can do to make it safer, then think about all these people that you would leave behind if something happened. It could destroy a farm. Something they worked all their life on could be gone in a heartbeat if something happened to them. And it's not that you need to think about it every single time you do something, but if there is something you can do to make your profession or what you do personally a little safer, then you take the time to think about it and maybe to actually do it. Don't go in that grain bin if there's some other way to do it. Don't, stop and think about all of these things. I know that in the course of the day that's difficult, but I think that would be the thing. Stop and think that this is something beyond you. It's not just you, that there's a lot of people involved in what happens if something happens to you.
Had I taken a moment there before I had him to turn the grain back on and considered what the potential consequences were of my position, and that the outcome would have been dramatically different. I'd have left the bin and we'd have seen if everything was working right. If not, we'd have shut it off and done something again. But the objective, the focus was, well, we need to get this flowing. Let's get these trucks loaded so we're ready in the morning. But it's really taking that moment, taking that time just to consider what the hazards are, what the potential consequences are. I appreciate the efforts of the Mars and Black Rescue, Posey EMS, and the sheriff. Hopefully, those who see this video, if it does anything, maybe we can all stop for just that second or two and consider what the potential consequences might be there. It just took seconds for me to be entrapped in that, and it would have just taken seconds to consider some other approach and not have endangered myself in that manner.